when you put in Coldplay and hit enter, it just goes, you know. You put in status quo and it goes. Coldplay just goes.
Look at the stars, look how they shine for you, and all the things you do. Yeah. They were all yellow.
I was like, who is this band? You know, I've got to find out, you know, more about them, because I actually really like this. You know, there's not much that comes on the radio that grabs me in the way that did.
You could have the most wonderful band ever in the world, and if the public don't want to buy it, they won't buy it. You cannot force them to buy it. You can keep banging and banging away, and if they don't want it, they ain't going to have it, and that's the end of it. And if the general public want to have your stuff, whether you make Tupperwares, goods, anything, if they want to have it, they'll have it. And you know, they want Coldplay, and Coldplay give them what they want. They're great songs.
You've gone within 4 years from being kids in a bedroom making music in 1996 to, you know, start of the 21st century, a few years later, headlining Glastonbury, and I think that was probably quite a, you know, a huge surprise and probably terrifying for them at the same time.
I just think they're a very good adult pop band, and I think they'll be one of the most important acts that we'll have seen for years. I think they'll be around for a long time yet to come.
He does sound like he's singing to you, and I think that's what the great singers, going back to Frank Sinatra, they sound like they're singing to you, not to the person over there, just to you. It can become what you want it to be.
For you, I play myself.
There are few things quite as tricky in a bright young man's life as his first week at university. In 1996, it was no different for accountant's son Chris Martin when the Greek and Latin student arrived at the prestigious University College London, all too fresh from Sherborne Public School. In his first week at his halls of residence, Martin met the men who would define his life.
It's very boring, really, because we just met at college, just like you meet your normal friends. But it was quite magic, really, because we were all living in the same building, and if the powers that be had decided that we should live in a different building or something, we'd have never met each other.
Chris and Jonny started playing guitar and stuff together, and then I joined. And we just played in our spare time with the intention of forming, fully getting a drummer and starting gigging and stuff. And it just kind of progressed nicely from there, really. It was
very much a student band. You know, they formed like many bands do, just 4 guys getting together in a student union or a student bar, or in this case, hall of residence, and just saying, you know, let's make some music together.
The reason why, certainly why I went to London, and I think why all of us went to London, was to try and meet the people, the musicians of our dreams, you know. So I certainly went there thinking, you know, I really want to meet some people that we can be in a band and take over the world with. And that's why it was so great, because we did.
At the start, all they were interested in doing was graduating from university. So all of this led to a situation where the lyrics were well thought out, the structures of the songs were well thought out. There wasn't a hell for leather, let's just dive in, steam into it, rock attitude about them. And for better for worse, that background shaped what was to become Coldplay.
There's always been this notion that in order to make serious, credible, popular music, that you have to have somehow suffered in your upbringing. If you're a little bit well brought up, if you've got what we traditionally call manners, then naturally that invalidates any of your art.
That's something that's sort of developed over the years, that, you know, you've got to be some tortured soul who grew up on the streets. The only reason they'll say that is because they want to put down anyone from a background that they don't particularly happen to like.
There's a long history all over the world of groups coming from working class backgrounds. People will have had nothing and done quite well, but most of the big sort of groups who stayed together for any length of time have been from quite good, you know, what we call good backgrounds in this country.
I'm not sure if it matters, but I think it does affect their music. You know, maybe they're more mild-mannered than other bands, but that doesn't mean that they can't communicate their message just as effectively. They just do it in a slightly more subtle, restrained way.
So, it doesn't matter really. It's the music that counts. That's the most important thing. And they're certainly pretty good at that.
I won't be bigger, stronger, drive a faster car. Take me anywhere in seconds. Take me anywhere I wanna go and drive around a faster car. I won't settle for nothing less. I won't settle for nothing less.
Coldplay played at Manchester's In the City Festival, British music's clearinghouse for unsigned bands. They were promptly snapped up by independent label Fierce Panda and touted as the new Travis.
Their first commercial release came through an independent label called Fierce Panda, and Fierce Panda have got a reputation for kind of putting out single EPs of kind of promising bands, so you know that is almost like the kind of the rubber stamp of being a good and interesting British band. I think Steve Lamacq at Radio 1 was very keen in the early days, and I think obviously NME. So I think they were the kind of the key people. I think the Fierce Panda release, I think the interest from the NME, and I think probably Steve Lamacq at Radio 1 were the three people who, you know, or the three groups of people who probably championed them in the early days.
Groups like Travis set up this new area for groups to step into. Prior to that, there'd been a lot of sort of new metal kicking around and things, and it was, you know, there was a door there for somebody like Coldplay to come through.
It's a difficult one when you say, is it fair to compare Coldplay to Travis? I mean, personally, when I heard the first Coldplay album, I thought it sounded more like Radiohead than anything else.
There was something about the early Coldplay that appealed to me, certainly. It was very organic. The sound was basic instruments. It was like, although it was wonderfully well produced, you always got the impression that this was just a band going in the studio recording their songs, whereas Travis were maybe just a little bit more produced.
It's just that sense of earnestness, rather than an actual sound. If you listen to those early Travis records, and you listen to any Coldplay record, they're very, very distinct, but they're roughly in the same ballpark. And so it was quite a lazy comparison for people to make.
I just think all bands nowadays that come out trying to sing proper songs with proper tunes and with a bit of emotion in them, and sometimes with some high notes in, you just get lumped in there, and people forget to actually look at the fact that they're original songs, you know. Maybe some of our songs do sound like other people, but the fact is those other people didn't write those songs, you know. And when we sit down to write a song, we don't think, oh right, let's make this one like, you know, Nirvana. We sit down to try and make a new song.
To be quite honest, the Beatles, during the Beatles era, any group that had 3 guitars and drums was accused of being a Beatles copy. You know, so does that mean that anyone that uses acoustic guitar and piano is going to be a Travis copy or a Coldplay copy? By the law of averages, there's going to be someone somewhere that's going to adopt exactly the same lineup, and they're going to be compared with one of these bands.
The very early Coldplay songs definitely show what would come on Parachutes. You know, they have this sort of classical kind of English sound to them, but maybe the ideas can't quite as well formed. You know, those songs, for the most part, were dropped from the live sets that Coldplay played on the Parachutes tour, for example. You know, there's only 2 songs which still remain, which is See You Soon, which was played on their most recent world tour, and it's one of their oldest songs. It wasn't quite good enough to go on Parachutes, but it became this kind of lost fan favourite song. So they were, you know, they were embryonic, but they were still brilliant.
But don't break your back if you ever hear this. Well, don't answer that. 'Cause in a bulletproof vest with the windows all closed, I'll be doing my best, and I'll see you soon. And in a telescope lens, and when all he wants friends, I'll see you soon.
Soon, though, the Travis comparisons fell away. Chris Martin's melancholy and his band's sophisticated musical backdrop ensured Coldplay were widely regarded as the next big thing.
If memory serves me correctly, I don't think there was much word about Coldplay at all. They broke really with a couple of singles off of the first album.
I remember the buzz at the time because I was at the '98 in the City convention in Manchester, and everyone was talking, who's this band Coldplay, you know, that had that set the whole place alight.
I can remember people talking to me about them in the early days. For example, I was in a bar in Battersea with a friend of mine. We met a girl who was a friend of his who was working at Parlophone, and she was talking about this band they were just signed and called Coldplay. So, you know, they were playing the next. So word kind of spread like that about them.
I'll see you soon.
And I honestly think that the girl who was at Polyphone, I can't remember her name, thank God, they didn't know what to do with them. It was like, oh, we've signed this group and we'll see.
I remember once again reading another article about them saying that they were going to finish their degrees before they signed for a record contract, which in fact I believe they did. That's what I remember distinctly reading about them and being fascinated by that, thinking, blimey. And then I heard Yellow.
Soon after a fierce bidding war, they signed to EMI offshoot Parlophone, home of Radiohead, the last British band to break the United States. With the marketing might of a multinational behind them, the gorgeous, unashamed love song that was Yellow reached the top 5 in the summer of 2000. It was Coldplay's first great moment.
Your skin, oh yeah, your skin and bones turning to something beautiful. You know I love you so. You know I love you so.
So I remember, I think Shiver was probably the first major label, or the first thing they really did with Parlophone, their current label, EMI Parlophone. I think what Shiver did was probably set up Yellow. Obviously Yellow is the huge worldwide hit single that really broke them, but I think, you know, Shiver was a, you know, a relatively good chart success, and it got them on the radio, and, you know, I think it was more a precursor of what would come with Yellow.
Well, people had heard Coldplay before Yellow, but not really. Yellow was the moment that Coldplay exploded.
I swam across, I jumped across for you. Oh, what a thing to do. 'Cause you were all yellow.
Yellow is the most important thing to Coldplay, I think.
Just hugely important. Just everything seemed to work perfectly for them from that point of view.
Broke them, really. I mean, that was the song that brought everybody's real attention to them. I can remember having XFM on, and it was on. Seemed like every 20 minutes it was on. It was like again.
And you were all yellow. Your skin, oh yeah, your skin and bones turning to something beautiful. You know, for you I'd bleed myself dry. For you I'd bleed myself dry.
A fantastic song, a massive hit, put them on the international map. They could have been a one-hit wonder.
The important thing is that they haven't sat back and sort of like allowed just one song to overshadow what they're about, whereas I think Radiohead might have been afraid with Creep that it might overshadow what they thought they were about at the time. With Yellow, I mean, Coldplay used it as a starting block, and it's a bloody good starting block, you know, and they've just continued to build on it.
Not for a moment would anyone think that there wasn't more in Coldplay's locker. It didn't sound like a one-hit wonder. It sounded like what it was, the first stepping stone to greater things.
Look how they shine, look at the stars, look how they shine for you, and everything that you do.
Often described as the perfect pop song, everything was right about Yellow. Even the video was a revelation.
Coldplay are very much a band, but the Yellow video was a Chris Martin video. It introduced Chris Martin to us.
Well, he looked a bit of a nerd, actually, didn't he? Because he's got his little anorak on, and he sort of like, the weather wasn't typical British summer weather. It wasn't particularly great weather, and he's walking along the beach, probably in drizzle. He's got his nerdy-looking anorak on, and he's sort of like oblivious to it, sort of like head nodding around and sort of singing happily this sort of song. I was going to say it's not a great video, but I mean, it was how many years ago, and I've just remembered, having not seen it for years, I've remembered exactly what it was like. So obviously it made some sort of impression.
I swam across, I jumped across for you. Oh, what a thing to do. 'Cause you were all yellow.
You had the subtlety, and it was pretty subtle, of
him starting singing the verses, being in darkness, and then as he got through the song, slowly the sky behind him moved into light, and that of course was saying this is the power of positivity, it's the power of love, it's the power of Coldplay.
For you I bleed myself dry.
Definitely, I think their videos are very, very important. Not necessarily for promotion, but I do think they sort of see it as part of the making of a record and the artwork and the whole kind of concept. You know, they think very hard about the way they're presented in terms of, you know, the artwork and their videos. You know, they don't just say to someone, "There's X amount of quid, go off and make a video for us." You know, they're involved with that process. So, you know, I think videos are probably very, very important to Coldplay.
It was lovely, you know. It takes a lot for a guy to admit a video is lovely.
Look at the stars, look how they shine for you, and all the things that you do.
As Yellow tumbled down the singles chart, Coldplay's debut album Parachutes clambered up it. Immediately it was clear that they were a very special group. The opening track, Don't Panic, displayed Martin's unique ability to infuse a song with a real sense of comfort. It was a gift he would utilise again and again.
I'm sinking like stones, all that we fall for. The home spaces we've grown, all of us are done for. And we live in a beautiful world. Watch this.
I wouldn't say Chris Martin's one of the best songwriters we have around, because he certainly works within parameters within which he feels very comfortable. But so thus far, it's served Coldplay incredibly well.
They are here at a moment when people needed a band like that. Therefore, I think he as a songwriter is quite important, although I'd like to stress that he always says that it's not just him, you know, that the three other guys are involved in writing the material as well.
Chris is obviously the pianist, but I think, you know, he described it to me as they're almost like a teepee, and they all lean back on each other, and that's how they make music. They just have to lean on each other, and if one of them goes, the whole thing collapses. So it's very much a case of, you know, all four members of the band being absolutely integral to the creative process.
See, a lot of people think we're miserabilists, which we're really not, because a lot of the emotions in a lot of our songs are when things seem to start off badly, then they get better. You know, sort of fairy tale type scenario, you know.
Chris will start with an idea of just a basic acoustic guitar and some vocals maybe, and from that will be worked on with the electric guitar, and just to sort of flesh it out as a song.
I write the lyrics. Write isn't really the right word, I just see what comes out. And Will often tell me what's crap and what isn't. We all listen to each other, that's why we're a band, you know.
Bones sinking like stones, all that we fall for. Homes, places we've grown, all of us are done for.
We're trying to achieve very emotional music, strong songs, because once you've got the songs, then you can have, you know, that's when you can start experimenting with sound and writing parts and arranging, and so they're kind of two separate things altogether, really.
It's like when bacon and eggs and mushrooms and chips are put on the same plate, become something greater than those individual parts. It becomes a cohesive whole that's tasty. Our sound is tasty. That is what our sound is.
We live in a beautiful world.
It's a very, very thin line between dispensing comfort and hope and appearing a bit wet. Chris Martin has not always straddled that line accurately, but he did it in significant moments in the early stages of Coldplay's career, say such as Yellow.
Aside from Yellow, you had that wonderful song Trouble, where he's being apologetic, which is also reassuring to the listener because it's not someone who's displaying a mile-wide ego. I'm sorry if I caused you trouble. Okay, someone being a real man and standing up and apologising for something was a great song. Of course, it won him a lot of enemies culturally because they thought he was just whinging and whining about things. But why on earth should there not be someone who writes about more positive things and about vulnerability and about their insecurities rather than about going out and shooting someone? It was just the antithesis to that, and I think the public were ready for it.
Martin often spent much of their early live shows apologising for his awkwardness, but he did so in a manner which endeared him to audiences. And soon these intense live shows and Martin's naked vulnerability complemented what was already becoming known as the Coldplay sound.
I think the sound of Coldplay is English, intense, warm, passionate. Sometimes they sound like every other band I've ever heard, and sometimes they sound completely only like themselves.
The only kind of pigeonhole I can put them into is that they're British, and I think there's a kind of there's a real bloodline of great British bands that I think that they follow. You know, they're up there with, they're just up there with those bands that made history, I think.
Singing I never meant to cause you trouble.
When you listen to Parachutes, there's a lot of little melodies going on, and there's phases in some of the songs where you've got like 3 melodies coming on together. The bass is doing one, the piano or the guitar's doing, and then the vocal's doing one. And that's very, very clever. It's not as like, oh, just bang out a song, doesn't matter what it is, you know, a few chords, don't worry about it, they'll love it. They've really thought about it.
Chris Martin is a very idiosyncratic vocalist, and his voice naturally just sounds slightly melancholy. That's not to say that the rest of the band forms around that, but the rest of the band certainly does absolutely everything that it can to complement his voice.
They spun a web for me. They spun a web for me. They spun a web for me.
Chris Martin can be guaranteed that in 30 years' time you can still play those songs and you won't say, oh, that's an early 2000s sound. It doesn't date. The sound will not date. The production techniques may date slightly, but I can see these songs being timeless.
So if you ever feel neglected, and if you think that all is lost, well, I'll be counting up my demons, yeah, hoping everything's not lost.
Artistically, Parachutes was a great success. The record sold 5 million copies and topped the UK chart. But if one song epitomised both the album and its creators, it was the epic, almost hymnal, Everything's Not Lost.
When you listen to Parachutes as a whole, as you get to the last song, it's a beautiful song. I mean, you can listen to that any day of the week. That sets up where they were going to go to next.
When you thought that it was over, you could feel it all around. When everybody's out to get you, don't you let it drag you down.
What Coldplay did on the first 2 albums is temper those massive anthems with slightly sort of subtler, more interesting music as well, and I think that's why they appeal to, you know, your kind of Virgin Radio listening guys who just want to listen to 3 minutes of Yellow, but at the same time there's other people that are kind of interested in, you know, sort of the slightly more obscure side of the music industry that, you know, that will find good and interesting songs on those records too. So I think there's probably anthems on all 3 of their albums.
It had this sort of epic, almost hymn-like quality to it, and it had an overwhelming sense of hope, even from the title. And hope is something that everyone goes back to with Coldplay.
Slightly jazzy in places, slightly discordant, with an E chord, an E seventh with a G on the bass, so you had a major third with a minor third on the bass, an A and an F sharp. Very simple chords that gave it a certain vibe.
When Coldplay come to a mini full stop in their career, you don't think, how are they going to top that? You think they just topped themselves, as it were, and they're going to do it again.
Not everyone fell for Coldplay. Some dismissed them as bland, something Martin constantly fretted over.
The very nature of what Coldplay are and their sound has turned out to be sort of a double-edged sword, because they rely on sort of high production values. They rely heavily on Chris Martin's voice and everything that accompanies it to create a sound that's sort of haunting and sweet at the same time. But the way that they do that is very, very formulaic, and it needs to be formulaic in order to establish that pattern that people can identify so greatly with. But obviously the problem with that is if you don't hit the nail on the head every time, people are just going to say, right, you know, this is like a 3-chord band who are just trotting out the same thing over and over again.
Is their flaw a naivety, a simplicity? Is this a modern thinking? I mean, in the days of the Beatles, it was not considered puerile to write, "She loves you, I want to hold your hand," okay? And yet people have got a little bit too intellectual in their thinking about how lyrics should be these days. People tend to think, oh, you've got to be controversial, you've got to write something that's going to provoke and irritate. There's every room for that, but there's every room for songs that are safe. There's songs that actually make you feel good and don't piss you off.
People are going to love him, people aren't going to like him. everybody says, you know, you'd be sitting in the pub and something, oh, I can't stand this, oh, no, this again. But, you know, they're a great band, and, I mean, Alan McGee made some cracking comments about them as well. Alan's the sort of guy he is, he's great, and he, you know, he's been responsible for some great music as well. He gave us Libertines. Thanks.
Now, I never meant to do you wrong, and that's what I came here to say. That if I was wrong, then I'm sorry. Don't let it stand in our way. 'Cause my head just aches when I think of the things that I should have done.
Who were the last big British band before Coldplay? And it was Oasis. And Oasis and Coldplay couldn't be more different. You've got Oasis, who are beer, and they're out on the town, and it's cigarettes, and it's alcohol, and it's cocaine. And then you've got Chris Martin, who is, you know, teetotal, vegetarian, you know, completely different approach to making music. And I think it did totally open up to criticism, because you've got Liam Gallagher, who described him as a, you know, as a geography teacher, and you've got, you know, Alan McGee, who described them as bedwetters, and, you know, so I don't think it was necessarily welcomed by the old school rock and roll fraternity.
But look at Oasis. I mean, you know, 2 brilliant albums and a succession of dull, boring records, and they've turned into a parody of themselves. And of course, that's going to get right up McGee's nose. Little wonder he came out with a statement like that. You know, at the end of the day, you just put that down to sheer jealousy.
I think if you'd said it out of the context that it was in, when his band, Primal Scream, were not nominated, I think if he'd said it just as a statement away from that situation, I think it would have had more validity. I think it was sour grapes. He's entitled to his opinion.
Coldplay were booked to fly to the United States on September the 12th, 2001. Instead, planes crashed into the World Trade Center the previous morning and all flights were cancelled. Still in shock that day, Martin began writing what would become A Rush of Blood to the Head's opening track, Politic.
It was written because of what had happened there and how the world was changing, or the world had changed forever again. And, you know, once again we hadn't seen it coming. You know, or we had seen it coming and hadn't done anything about it.
There was a lot of songs written at that time about September 11, and most of them were shite. But Politic kind of just doesn't mention it, but it has a good bit of a pop at the Western corporate, you know, the corporate world. When you listen to the lyric, there's always a little message there.
Given that Coldplay aren't a band that traditionally have taken that many risks up till now, then yeah, you like to see them sort of do something slightly different, and that made people sit up and take notice. And it was a very clever move in the way that it kicked off the second album and made people think, oh, they're not just rehashing what they did on the first album.
It heralded a new era of Chris Martin's songwriting. This brooding plodding eights feel, the C to the F minor sus4, a fantastically evocative sound, if you like, to the chords, which suited it absolutely, and it became an important part of the stage shows from then on.
It was enough to make people realise that perhaps there's a little more to them than, you know, because the rest of the second album was going to be kind of like the first album, only a little bit better. So yeah, good move, a good move.
Immediately it was clear that in the 2 years since Parachutes, Coldplay had made great artistic leaps forward. Better still, if Martin had doubted that his band were worthy of sitting at the top table alongside Tom York and Bono, few others did. Clearly, Coldplay were in it for the long haul.
Rush of Blood was definitely slicker, but it doesn't sound so slick. The sheen on it hasn't taken away the emotions from the record. So I think it's a move in the right direction.
From a songwriting point of view, it was more ambitious than their first album. I think the sales of the first record and the Mercury nomination and, you know, winning the NME Awards and all that kind of stuff put them in a place where they could say to their record label, you've got to trust us to make the record that we want to make.
Not necessarily ever going to be their best album, but it was possibly their bravest album because they didn't make Parachutes 2.
They kind of set their stall out with Parachutes, and it seemed to sort of tie up any loose ends with a Rush of Blood to the head, which is why it still sounds, you know, it's still evidently Coldplay, but it was just so much better than the first album.
It's a very strong record. There's not a weak song on there, whereas Parachutes has a couple of tracks which are, you know, not quite there, a couple of fillers. But there's not one weak moment on Rush of Blood to the Head. I think it's a truly great record.
There's definitely an urgency to this record that maybe there wasn't on the first one. There's a kind of, I remember Chris saying that, you know, that there's the kind of the general theme behind this record is that, you know, everything has to be done today because there's no knowing what the future is going to be like. And I think the album's got a little bit more edge to it because of that. There's a more urgency and it's more edgy and it's just a bit darker, isn't it? It's just a bit darker in the way that it sounds.
I was lost, oh yeah.
But if A Rush of Blood to the Head had heart and soul beneath Chris Martin's uneasiness, the album's third top 10 single, The Scientist, found him at his most lonesome.
Come up to meet you, tell you I'm sorry. You don't know how lovely you are. I had to find you, tell you I need you, tell you I set you apart.
There is definitely an element of paranoia. You kind of get the feeling with Chris Martin it's always been there, and it's something that's been exacerbated by becoming involved in you know, a real cutthroat industry.
Rush of Blood to the Head was slightly darker, but not unacceptably so. And I think post 9/11, it heralded a different style, a different side to Chris Martin's writing, that a lot of people accepted this, okay, the guy's not as bland as we thought he was.
It's such a shame for us to part. Nobody said it was easy. No one ever said it would be this hard. Oh, take me back to the start.
I think there is an element of paranoia in some of the lyrics, and because it's very worrying when you've had your first album, which the record label thought were going to sell probably 40,000. Parlophone thought would be a good figure, and I think it sold 1.6 million in the UK alone. So you've got your follow-up album. Of course, you're terrified. It's like if this is a duffer, that's it. It's like, how do you bounce back from that?
You could suggest that the music behind those quite paranoid lyrics are the work of three or four of them who have become more confident. So it's musically it's quite a confident sounding album, and it also manages to match that sense of paranoia.
Almost overwhelmed by their success, Coldplay finished their tour and briefly went their separate ways, hoping to rustle up songwriting ideas. They then reconvened in London and New York to share those ideas and record what would become their third album. Yet again they struggled hard, and the first 8 months of recording were so barren that almost 60 potential songs were scrapped. Finally, the foursome got going, and despite the hiatus, returned better, stronger, and even more popular. The dazzling speed of sound, which somehow appropriately mused over the possibility of miracles, was a taster.
Where does it put Coldplay now? Well, it puts them pretty much at the top of their game and ahead of the pack.
I remember the first time I heard it, I thought, that's not that great. But the second time, third time, that's a great song. It just...
How long before I get in? Before it starts, before I begin? How long before you decide? Or before I know what it feels like? Where do I go? If you never try, then you'll never know. And how long before I can climb off of the side of this mountain of mine?
The one thing Speed of Sound showed to everybody was that it really had been worth the 3-year wait, that the quality had not gone down, that Coldplay was still a force to be reckoned with, that we could expect great songs.
They sounded hugely confident in a way that Coldplay had never sounded before, and sonically it sounded massive. It just sounded big.
I think how their sound is changing is that they've now got their own sound, if that makes sense. So, whereas you listen to the first record and you say, obviously, you've got X, Y, and Z, or the influences, less so with the second album. With the third album, you just think, that sounds like a Coldplay album, and it sounds like a brilliant Coldplay album.
There was a presence of synthesizers that I'd not really heard before. And in fact, it sounded initially more like U2 than archetypal Coldplay, with a much more cavernous, open sound.
Well, I think it was richer and darker in its sound. And I think there was a lot more confidence in it. Because I think once you've spent all that time getting the difficult third album right, and you're sure about it, you then have a great deal of confidence.
There's stuff in there that you might recognise, but the overriding feeling is that they've absolutely hit their stride, and they are their own band, and they, you know, and that's, I guess, how they've changed. They're confident enough to make the music that they want to make.
Speed of Sound stormed the American top 10 in its first week of release. The Beatles and the Spice Girls were the only previous British acts to achieve this distinction. Soon the album X and Y would reach #1 on both sides of the Atlantic.
I think there's an American influence ever so slightly in what Coldplay do, but I think it's about as British as you can get nowadays. You know, it generally within their sound.
You couldn't imagine them being an American band or a German band or anything, but there is something about them that appeals to the Americans. The Americans have traditionally loved these simple songs that convey a meaning and that you can interpret in a dozen different ways.
It's sort of down to the fact that they write good songs. At the end of the day, good songwriting attracts people that like to listen to music.
To be honest, there isn't a proper answer to Coldplay's success, but you know that Chris Martin's absolute earnestness and his honesty touched people, and it touched Americans too. Coldplay are believable, and that believability literally crosses the ocean.
If a rush of blood to the head had been a great leap forward from Parachutes, X and Y was another crucial step ahead. And when Martin sang "You Mean More to Me Than Any Colour I Can See" on Low, it was as if he was finally burying Yellow.
All their albums are good. The last two have been very good, but they haven't released their Unforgettable Fire or their The Joshua Tree yet.
It will be looked back on as a classic X and Y. It's not in my book. I don't think it's better than Rush of Blood to the Head, which I think is a better album. That's just my taste. But I think people will look back at X and Y and because of what it did, more than anything.
What if I got it wrong? And no poem or song could put right what I got wrong, or make you feel I belong. What if you should decide that you don't want me there by your side?
The album is unbelievably successful in the production stakes. It satisfies me as a producer. It's big sounding. Even on my little Sony blaster at home, you put it on, turn it up, and it just sounds mega.
It succeeded artistically, it succeeded commercially. And if you're trying to define an era, then you can ask for no more than that.
But certainly X and Y is, if not the greatest, one of the greatest pop albums that has appeared in the 2000s so far.
When the tears come streaming down your face, or you lose something you can't replace, when you love someone but it goes to waste, what could be worse? Lights will guide you home, and ignite your bones. I will try to fix you.
To support X and Y and confirm their status as world champions, Coldplay headlined Glastonbury for a second time. Songs such as the single and the lovelorn ballad Fix You, one of Martin's most tender to date, were emotionally charged mass sing-alongs.
What is the typical Coldplay song? What is the one that epitomises what Coldplay is all about? I think Fix You is one that stands up. It's a masterpiece of arrangement. The way the song is paced, the way it builds, the way it goes through that plodding middle section where the chord sequence just goes round and round and round, and then again it comes back to the simple end. Fix You is absolutely fantastic. We'll remember that one for years to come.
What they have to do, in a way that U2, probably the best career template for Coldplay have done, is to keep being the biggest band in the world and not to lose the hunger, not to get distracted by silly solo projects, not to get distracted by the trappings. I mean, they can keep making great records, then we can be back here in a decade's time going, there's never been another band who've been as popular as Coldplay for this long and have kept the intensity up. If they do that, then that is something absolutely phenomenal.
They haven't deviated They've kept on the same path and just brought things in as they're going along the path, which is it's a bit like the Beatles. The Beatles didn't deviate that much from the original plan. The plot was there, you know, it was laid out, and they just brought in stuff, and I think Coldplay are doing a similar thing.
They've got to step outside themselves to a certain extent. You know, they've got to do something different. They probably know it as well. They got away with it with X and Y because it is a better album than Russian Blood to the Head. But it's still too similar sonically, and they can't do that again. They're going to have to really stretch themselves or try a completely different approach.
Well, as long as it doesn't get too political, I think that they can actually go so far as being the biggest band since the Beatles. I really feel as strongly as that. They have the musicianship there, they have the songcraft there, and they certainly have a unity there. When you look at the band, you sense that the egos have not yet crept in. Who knows what will happen in the future, but you sense that if it does start to go awry, that they would knock it on the head before things started to get ugly.
Let's just hope they keep their feet on the ground and bring out some more great records.
How important are Coldplay? Well, they're not the Sex Pistols, are they?
Without a doubt, Coldplay are an important band. The records are too good.
Importance is often judged by hindsight. But without hindsight, Coldplay are looking as though they might be a pretty important band. And the more people that you touch, the more important that you become. And Coldplay, more than anyone, understand that.
I think they're the biggest band in Britain at the minute. It's Coldplay and U2, I think, at the minute. It's the biggest bands in Britain.
Probably the biggest band in this decade, whatever we're going to call this decade. The first, decade of the 21st century. It's going to be probably the most important British band, if not band in the world.
Coldplay are one of the best bands at using an infectious melody that does get right under your skin, and you know, even if you don't particularly like the band, you know, you'll hear one of their songs on the radio and you'll be humming it all day.
They were that confident and believed in their act that much that they were prepared to say, we know it'll be right when it gets there. When we get those masters, it's going to be brilliant.
There kind of is only one Coldplay in the same way there is only one U2 and there is only one Radiohead. So, you know, I think what they won't be remembered as is bedwetters or geography teachers. Do you know what I mean? I think that's the thing, is the early criticisms, they've just proved everyone wrong.
Ooh.